This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Welcome to part 2 of How to Write Great Sentences. If you haven't heard it already, go back and listen to last week's episode, part 1 of this discussion. We're going to pick up right where we left off with Robert bringing a sentence to the roundtable. Enjoy.
I've got one.
All right, bring it on.
And it's interesting that we spoke about, simile, etc. This is from Maggie Stiefvater's Scorpio Races, which is a book that stuck with me. Mm-hmm. And it's an unusual book about these sort of a romance between two quite different characters in the setting of a bleak island in Irish Sea, maybe, and these magical horses that come out of the sea. So it's probably predominantly YA, but it's to me the edge of literary YA, I suppose. And I couldn't even tell you what the context is because I found it a few days ago. But it just I was reading through, and she has a lot of very, very good paragraph and sentence construction. She has a particular voice, I think, Maggie. And if you ever want to know what her voice is like, just follow her on Twitter because she's hilarious and manages to convey a lot in just 140 to 280 characters. Okay. All right. Peg's smile remains in place, but it's like a picture of a smile someone has hung on her face instead. So the preface to this is there's a conversation going on, and then one of the main characters says something to this person. They come to the front of a queue, says something to this person. This person's smiling and warm, and all of a sudden their smile froze, basically, because they suddenly realise they've been told is not appropriate. So Peg's smile remains in place, but it's like a picture of a smile someone has hung on her face instead. And then the next sentence, it is utterly motionless, and her eyes don't match it.
Nice. Yeah, I really like the first sentence because of how much it conveys, but when you add that last bit about her eyes not matching it, it just completes.
That's when it punches it back.
Yep. Yeah.
And again, the two themselves, I mean, one ends, well, the first one hung on her face instead. I like the ending of that one. Her eyes don't match it. Well, you probably wouldn't normally suggest to somebody that they end a powerful sentence with it. But somehow that works. So I think, it's important that we started out talking about this. It's not about necessarily correct grammar or, perfect arrangement of, object, verb, subject.
Right.
It's about what the sentence has to do and what it's going to convey to the reader, and that is obviously very subjective as well.
Yes. Yeah, well, and I think in that sentence, it is almost invisible, kind of like he said at the end of dialogue. We don't really worry about he said.
That's right.
And so what we're getting is that imagery of the smile, and now we're adding the eyes, and we know it is the smile, right? But it would be clunky to say her eyes did not match the smile. Her eyes did not match the smile hung on her face. Or you want to shorten that ending and not say anything that you don't need to say because what we're concerned about is the eyes. That's what we're doing. We're putting the eyes and the smile together.
And you're fading everything else into the background.
Yeah. So it is a very appropriate ending to that sentence.
Yeah, which is why you can't get hung up on rules. You've just got to, and I suppose that's probably why Kathryn and I had trouble extracting something specific, because as soon as you do that, it doesn't look that great. But you put it back into place, it's the missing piece of the jigsaw.
Right. Definitely.
So write whatever the hell sentences you like, as long as they fit.
And serve your story.
Right, exactly.
And convey powerful things to your reader, Right. And not every sentence can be powerful. It would be, as we were saying before, it would be tedious for a writer to try to make every sentence powerful. We need movement, we need information, we need action. And then, give us give us those moments as we go along.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, ready for another one?
Yeah, bring it on.
Okay, so this is from Blood Harvest by S.J. Bolton. This is the book I was referring to at the beginning where I said, this book I really, really liked, and I teach an excerpt from it all the time. And I was like, well, these sentences aren't floating my boat.
It's like one of those things, like sometimes your favorite books don't have showy sentences. Like they don't have to show off.
Right. Yeah.
I just think that's amazing. I just think that people who think that writing is all about this creating this beautiful prose that either wins awards or people just drool over isn't true.
Right. And it's a great reminder to do this and say, oh, so why did I love this book? It wasn't for the prose. It was because I got caught up in the characters and the action and the plot, and this is a mystery / psychological thriller. All right. So I guess the first sentence is the one of concern, but I'm going to read a short paragraph to give it some context here.
Mm-hmm.
Huddled in front of the burned-out fireplace of the royal cottage was the thin, trembling body of a girl. Gillian. 20 yards away, he could hear her crying. Except it wasn't really crying. Keening. That was the only word for it. A high-pitched, heartbreakingly sad keening. The Irish called it the song for the dead. So, this paragraph ends a chapter.
Right.
Right.
So it ends a chapter with the word dead.
Yes, so clearly we need a punch at the end of all that. a sentence that delivers a punch. So,
can you isolate the one sentence again?
Yeah. Huddled in front of the burned-out fireplace of the royal cottage was the thin, trembling body of a girl. So that sentence opens the chapter's end paragraph. And it really opens this whole moment because the POV character has been out jogging, so he just kind of comes up upon this scene. Right? So that paragraph is kind of the whole movement there.
Right, so that sets both like an image in your mind and a mood for that image, both together in one sentence.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up because we haven't talked about mood in the other sentences really. I mean, we've touched on voice and tone, but and this book is heavy on mood, which is one of the things I really liked about it. She evokes mood very well.
And also the choice of starting with the verb like that, I think, is really powerful, as opposed to the description.
Right.
So we're immediately, hooked into I'm going to, in my head, my mind has to understand how to by doing it. So we already, as opposed to, at the end of the lane there was a cottage which had been completely burned. It was just a shell. Blah 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 blah. It's got nothing like that.
Right.
The funny thing it did to me when you were reading it is that I was zoomed right into that description, and all of a sudden it went 20 yards. I go, whoa, I'm back here now. That was weird.
Right. It is weird. Yeah, and I think this really points out the importance of word choice. Huddled. That's an evocative word. It's not standing or sitting or kneeling or beside a fireplace or in front of. It's huddled. Okay, that says something about the emotional state of this person, that the girl is huddled there, right? And I think that's part of why mood is so immediate with this short passage. And then, of course, the fireplace is burned out. And the girl isn't named. At the end of the sentence, it's the thin, trembling body of a girl. So then we have a period and then the name. So then we get the recognition piece. But that name is its own sentence. So it's setting up this moment of intrigue even though it only lasts for the space between a period and a capital letter, right? Mm-hmm. But it's the thin, trembling body of a girl. Jillian. Okay. All right. And this paragraph builds really well to the end, to that punching word dead at the very end. We have the image and the mood, the recognition of the girl, Jillian. Then we go back to the point of view character 20 yards away and get another sensory detail. He can hear her crying. So it's carrying pretty well 20 yards away. And, it's not really crying. Okay, what is it? Keening. That's another powerful word, like huddled. Mm-hmm. Right? And then it's described for the readers so that we get on the same page with the author here, so we understand what it means to be keening. It's high-pitched, it's heartbreaking, it's sad. Right. It's the song for the dead. Right?
Right. It's interesting that, like, that whole paragraph, that first sentence that you read is really tight, right? Like, there aren't any extra words. They use huddled to convey so much. And then it kind of, like, the rest of the sentences in that paragraph until the last one, it, like, describes the sound, and it uses more words. You know what I mean? Like, so she's crying. Well, she's not really crying. She's keening.
Yeah,
it's not
just
right. Keening. She's keening the song of the dead. But, like, it's interesting how they play with that juxtaposition between really, really tight prose and then allowing you to experience it on a little slower basis.
Right. And that pace is actually created with short sentences. It's this little paragraph here. So that build that you're describing, Kathryn, the space is created with the periods and those slightly longer pauses that you would get. So it's an interesting use of short, even choppy sentences. There's that single word, Jillian, and kind of contradicting. She was crying. No, she wasn't crying. She was keening. Right. Right. Yeah. Sort of that.
Is keening its own sentence, too? Because it looks like keening is set off from things as well.
It is its own sentence, yeah. So it says, so Jillian, period. 20 yards away, he could hear her crying, period. Except it wasn't really crying, period. Keening, period. And then another longer sentence. That was the only word for it, colon. A high-pitched, heartbreakingly sad keening, period. The Irish called it the song for the dead. So,
So there's almost there's almost no two sentences in there that have the same rhythm. There's two one-word sentences.
Yeah, except for Jillian and keening.
Keening, yeah, that's right. So
very different feel to it.
And so there's that whole thing about you put out a sentence by itself, it could be great, but you put it back into a paragraph where all the sentences have the exact same construction, then it won't be great.
Right.
Necessarily.
Yes.
I mean, it could still be depending on what the writer's trying to achieve. So it does come down to intention. And it occurred to me that when you were talking about the kind of the setting of this burnt out place and the girl who is unnamed. This is how we get the translation between, say, a movie, a visual image, and the written word. Because in a movie, the camera would be set. We'd have a back shot. We'd see the girl from behind, and then maybe the girl would turn around and look, and then you'd recognise them. And so the way to do that in text is not to say, when she turned around, I saw the features, those familiar features, blah, 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 blah. I mean, you might choose to do it, but this particular writer just chose to do it with a one word that then lent the recognition. So it could be what's inferred is it could be that there's either no recognition or you want to leave that to the reader to make up for themselves until suddenly it's delivered. So rather than a character suddenly turning around and facing the camera, that's the literary equivalent, I suppose.
Right. And I think...
And the same with the sound.
Yes.
In a movie, you've got the capacity to create a huge amount of emotion with sound. And so the fact that the author has chosen keening as opposed to, a wailing or a crying or a sobbing or It's evocative of a particular audio tone, which is then explained. You could argue that some of that might be unnecessary, but what it does do is it packs the sandwich to the ending delivery of the Song for the Dead.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, builds that tension up. Why is she crying? Oh, she's not even crying. Why is she keening? Oh my gosh, she's keening. And then all the way through to that punch dead.
Right. And this paragraph is a great example of the role of rhythm in creating mood and tension and working with, discovery. And you would never say that Jillian period is a proper sentence, right? So we aren't looking at grammar. We're looking at the power it has within your story.
Right. But like in that one, you recognize that your point of view character is recognizing the girl, right? So you don't need to have he realized it was Jillian, right? Exactly if you did that, it would ruin the whole feel of it. So it's all kind of implied, like the reader understands.
Yes.
Well, the melodrama has been emphasized by removing words.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice.
All right.
Ta-da.
One more?
Yeah.
Keep them coming.
Okay, so this is Annabelle by Kathleen Winter. And
great cover.
I taught a book when it's full of flags.
For those on the audio feed only, this one's full of post-it notes.
Yes, right? Post-it flags. That's right, all over the book. So this.
What? You mean you don't do that for every book you read always?
Only when it's research. And I just found
all the best words of mine.
I just found a long lost bookmark to one of my Leadville, Colorado postcard. All right,
that's fantastic.
Little foray into Alida's reading world. So this opens with a prologue, but I'm skipping that, and we're going to the first sentence of the first chapter. Wayne Blake was born at the beginning of March, during the first signs of spring breakup of the ice, a time of great importance to Labradorians who hunted ducks for food. And he was born, like most children in that place in 1968, surrounded by women his mother had known all her married life, Joan Martin, Eliza Goody, and Thomasina Bakey. That's all one sentence.
Wow.
Yeah. So we've got a dash setting off the clause about Labradorians, and then the colon before the list of the three women's names, but that's all one sentence. And it's, there's a prologue, but it's really the first sentence of the book, of the story. The prologue is appropriately separate.
What comes immediately following that?
Okay, so and Thomasina Bakey. Women who knew how to ice fish and sew caribou hide moccasins and stack wood in a pile that would not fall down in the months when their husbands walked the trap lines. Period. Women who would know, during any normal birth, exactly what was required. End of paragraph, right? And you knew that was the end of the paragraph, didn't you?
Yeah. Yep.
Because there's the punch.
Right.
That's a really interesting construction. So you've got this broad landscape set up, then it chunks down to something about the women, and then it chunks down to something very, very specific. But the very, very specific thing has got some quite interesting construction and imagery.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and the intrigue for the story, right?
Yes.
They know what a normal birth looks like, and the whole sentence opens with "he was born."
Yep.
Yeah.
Right. So you know that's action you're actually looking for. And then it sets it so far off, like you're going, why was this important that he was born? And so you're waiting for that reasoning. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I mean, it opens with just biographical data. Born at the beginning of March. Okay. And I love, Robert, how we get that landscape. It's like, here's a person, but hang on, we're way back here. We're looking at all of Labrador. And then, but there are these women, and there are their husbands and trap lines. And it also sets up a certain sense of place, that you wouldn't get if you just stayed with the birth of Wayne. Like you would be missing the sense of harsh climate and an isolated community that you get when you talk about wood piles and trap lines and husbands being gone for months at a time.
Yep.
And all of that is packed into, I think it's a 3-sentence opening paragraph, and it's building to normal birth. Right. There it is.
Yeah. And what's good is it starts with the person and an action. In an action in the past, obviously, was born. Because I think the thing, you were always warned against don't start with the weather, or don't start with it was a dark and stormy night. This sentence does precisely that, in the sense that it establishes setting, but it does so by establishing it from a particular character's sense of that setting, or whether we don't know that, but it names a particular character.
Yeah. And doesn't it make you want to read this book? Like, I mean, it's not everyone's cup of tea, but they would know during any normal birth what was required. So right away, I'm like, what don't they know? What's not normal? What is required? There's so much intrigue there.
And maybe, that we've got, one man and 2 women here on the podcast, and I didn't pick that. What I picked up was tough women in a unforgiving landscape.
Right.
Whereas what you picked up is there's something there about someone being born, but it's not normal. And I didn't pick that up because I didn't give birth. So, it could be interesting there that there's some elements of subtext going on.
Right.
That are going to get picked up differently by different readers, but still I would feel compelled to read on because of the nature of that sort of tough landscape and women who've rallied round. Okay, why is that?
Yeah, and I think that's a really great thing to bring up, because as writers, I think we need to be able to justify why something is in our story, and especially the very opening, because if that doesn't turn on a reader, you don't have that reader. So why not stick with Wayne Blake? Why show us this cold, harsh landscape and these tough women and how competent they are? I mean, it makes their not knowing what's required shocking, because they know how to ice fish and sew moccasins out of caribou hide and pile wood, right? So
that's right. There's nothing these people don't know about survival.
Exactly. Yeah. So when you get to where they don't know what to do about this birth, it's like, whoa. So that juxtaposition is so subtle. The author is not telling us what we need to understand here. It's just like, here's this portrait of this community of women, and right, the punch.
There's something being dangled. Definitely,
yeah.
Which is obviously what pulls a reader in. And as you say, we're not saying this is all things to all people, but that's clearly, if you want the type of reader that you want for your book, you've got to know what hook you've got to dangle for them,
right?
And that one clearly is one.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Anything else we want to say about Annabelle?
Well, again, you've got can you read the last sentence again in that paragraph?
Yeah. Women who would know during any normal birth exactly what was required.
Yeah, so those last 3 words, exactly what was required, is again a really nice. It's a hard sounding ending. It doesn't fade away. It ends the paragraph, and as Kathryn pointed out, it tops and tails as well. So you've got the was born, at the start, and then they're supposed to know what was required at the end. So yeah, right.
And we've talked about rhythm and build a little bit, and I think this is another great example of an important word choice. You said it doesn't fade away. So if we said women who would know exactly what to do.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
That's right. Yeah.
But exactly what was required. Required has that nice hard sound. and the breath kind of stops after the D. There's no trailing off.
Yep.
So, reading sentences aloud will really help develop that ear
Completely
for
agree.
word choice.
Yeah. And actually, it's quite shocking sometimes how different a sentence is when it's read aloud.
Yes. Yeah, very much so.
Things that you don't pick up, like a whole string of words that you might have chosen that all start with S. or those
Right.
Those terrible fantasy names that you've given characters that your audio narrator is going to hate.
Yes.
And also, the other thing that is interesting that audio narrators, it's just again, but there's a reason for reading them out loud, is that some words don't go well together when they're read out aloud because the consonants don't match.
Yes.
So, it was that psychopathic knowing, or it was the psychopathic positioning, things that just, your lips stumble over them, yet in visually they're not necessarily bad.
Right.
But you've got to understand that maybe some people are sub-vocalizing, and so it helps to read out loud just to get that beautiful flow. I do think you're right there.
Yeah, and I do hear words in my head. So if I read a book where the author hasn't been mindful of that, even though I'm reading silently, I will stumble. I will stumble over words where it would be awkward to say it out loud.
Yes. So, for example, you could have something like telepathic tsunami, and it would look good in text because it's two T's, but then you're trying to read that out. It's one's got the hard T, the other one's got the silent or partially silent. So there are things that are weird that when you read them out, you don't realise when you've written them, and as I said, I think it's quite surprising. So, particularly for those chapter openers and chapter endings, if you can't read anything else, at least, or scene openers and scene endings, at least read those out loud.
Yes,
because that's probably where you're going to leave those lasting impacts or hook people in.
Next week, we'll finish up our conversation about great sentences. And while we're waiting for that episode, head over to the Storyworks Writers Facebook group. Share one of your favorite sentences with us, or maybe a clunker that you would like to pick apart and analyze. Thank you for listening to the Storyworks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.